Another major story over the weekend overseas, of course, in Egypt. The violence escalating, and it's now on both sides. At least 24 policemen were killed in an attack by Islamist militants early this morning. The officers were actually on their way back to their barracks when they were ambushed by militants armed with machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. We want to get the latest from Egypt. NBC News' Ayman Moheldin live from Cairo with us. Ayman, good morning.
Good morning, Brian. There's actually a few developing stories here. We'll start with the latest to come out of a Cairo criminal court, and that involves actually the former president, Hosni Mubarak. He's obviously gone through a series of trials since he was removed from power back in 2011. A Cairo court has now ordered his release. He had been acquitted on previous charges involving the 2011 revolution, charges of corruption, but now a Cairo court in the appeals process has decided that he is now free and should be released. Now, we were just speaking to judicial sources who say that he will not be released just yet. There are other pending investigations against him, and those investigations will still allow him to remain in prison. But the fact that a Cairo criminal court in itself has ordered his release, that is a significant development, and certainly is going to have massive repercussions here, at least some reactions here in Egypt because of the tense situation. The other story you're talking about developing this morning out of the Sinai Peninsula. A few hours ago, Egyptian conscripts, police officers that are conscripts here in the security forces, were ambushed in the city or near the city of Rafah along the Gaza-Egypt border. 25 of them were killed. 2 others were injured, according to multiple sources. An indication, really, of the growing rise of militancy in the northern Sinai. They've become more brazen in their attacks in recent weeks. And then, obviously, a very disturbing piece of information late last night that involves the Ministry of Interior. That, again, according to security sources, say at least 35 people were killed, 35 prisoners, as they were being transferred from a police station to a security prison here. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood says they were not trying to escape. That's the line coming out of the police force here, that these people were trying to escape and that the police had to put them down, leading to their deaths. The Muslim Brotherhood say these people were tortured and they were killed deliberately by the police. So a lot of developing stories this morning here, Brian.
Ayman, please be safe. Ayman Moheldin live for us in Cairo. Listen, I want to throw to Senator Lindsey Graham, and Richard, especially want to get your take on the potential downside of this whole situation. Have a listen.
If you had new elections, the Brotherhood would get creamed at the ballot box, but they're going to be a very formidable force on the streets. They're going to get aligned with al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is going to come uninvited into Egypt, and you're going to have a failed state. And that means gas prices go up for us, the Suez Canal gets compromised, and Egypt becomes a staging area for terrorist acts against Israel. This is an absolute disaster in the making.
It's possible. One of the first rules of the Middle East is things have to get worse before they get even worse. And we're beginning to see that in Egypt. It's hard to exaggerate the degree of polarization. You're having all these killings on both sides. This is clearly winner-take-all, loser-lose-all politics. The United States has virtually no influence over the trajectory of Egypt, whether we continue our aid, cut our aid, or find a halfway house. The dynamic is, if you will, in motion right now.
Now, I want to ask, anyone can take this. If the United States had said, okay, listen, what was happening was not working, let's have an election and see what happens from there, could that have worked, or was it already, Morsi was already...
Why do we have the power to call an election in their country?
At least politically to push for that, or to advocate for it, which we did not do.
Well, people on the Muslim Brotherhood side would have argued with some legitimacy that you already had an elected government. It had several more years to run, and the process, there was no legal basis under Egyptian law for ending the government, calling a new election. So my hunch is they'd boycott it. They know they'd lose, and what you'd have is this thing continuing to be fought out in the streets, which, by the way, what Lindsey Graham said has some truth. You've got now not a failed state, but a weak state. The economy is tanking. There's no tourism. There's no investment. This is the...
I think we're going to continue to see false starts, though, because obviously what we've seen with Morsi getting elected in, and then there was this ultimate buyer's remorse, thinking that there wasn't enough inclusion in what he was doing for Egypt. So moving forward with the president saying, there's going to be a lot of false starts, democracy's hard for it to take and plant seeds, yet we want it to take seeds, but we're not giving it the guiding hand that it potentially needs.
I'm not sure there is a guiding hand to be given. I mean, you've got to have constitutional reform, you've got to have civil society. Normally you have all sorts of prerequisites in place, checks and balances within a society, a culture of some compromise. None of those things is in place. So you could have new elections tomorrow. It's not clear, though, that in the aftermath, first of all, the elections, whether there would be enough inclusion for the elections to be seen as legitimate.
Would they be legitimate, yeah.
And then afterwards, there's no concept of loyal opposition.
Why do you think the cutting off of aid wouldn't be effective?
Because right now there's billions of dollars going into Egypt unconditionally from Arab governments. So U.S. It's really interesting. This is actually a snapshot of how the U.S. position in the world has changed. Even if we cut off our $1 billion plus of military, it would have a symbolic impact. But first of all, there's enough anti-Americanism there that the military would use this to some extent to fuel themselves. Secondly, the Saudis or the UAE or one of the other Arab countries that hates the Muslim Brotherhood and does not want them to gain any traction would more than offset the U.S. money. So we're not in a position where we can control the outcome events here.
All right.